I wanted to talk to Julie Kelly. Julie is, she's a senior writer at The American Greatness and also an author of January 6th, which is very difficult for me to say without saying the day democracy almost died. But the book is January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Wow. Interesting, isn't it? And then the latest articles that she has, which I find amazing, is that, representatives, not J6 protesters, defile the sacred U.S. Capitol. And the one thing that I found amazing from last week, we heard all the time that these criminals, these paraders, these trespassers were getting extra cases thrown against them, extra charges against them, because Vice President-elect and the Vice President were on the grounds. Well, not so fast. Julie Kelly, welcome to the program. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Good morning. And I just want to say I just paid my yearly subscription to Blaze yesterday. I got my email, so I encourage anyone who somehow is listening and is not
of damn freeloaders.
Because I love everything Blaze does. You guys are great. Steve Dace, glad everybody.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So, we know that the Oath Keepers are now, they've said that they are not guilty, right? They've pled not guilty against these judges. One of the things that you talk about, and I don't remember what article it was or whatever, but the judges that these people, these paraders, these damn trespassers are going up against, one of them is a possible Supreme Court justice, right?
Well, correct. And these judges, I will tell you, after listening to these hearings for nearly a year, all of these D.C. District Court judges, and this is where every single one of the 725 cases related to January 6th will be prosecuted. Every single judge, from these Trump judges down to Reagan appointees, if you could believe it, are still on the court, even though they should not be, are submitting to the government's demands here, have signed off on pretrial detention orders, even for nonviolent offenders. This means right now there are men who have been incarcerated for over a year.
That's a criminal in and of itself, man.
Yes, it is. And they've been denied bond. It's very important for people to understand, not because they have criminal records, because almost none of them do, not because their actions were particularly violent, certainly nothing compared to what we saw in 2020. It is simply because they were involved in what these judges call an attack on our democracy, the storming of the Capitol,
right,
an armed, deadly insurrection. They continue to lie about what happened to Officer Ryan Sicknick. They continue to lie, judges and prosecutors, about any number of issues related to January 6th, which is what you just talked about. My latest report on a lie that's contained in not just charging documents has been presented to grand jury and certainly to a federal court, and that is that Kamala Harris was inside the Capitol when it was breached. It is a complete, flat-out lie, but yet it supports one of their most used misdemeanor charges against January 6th defendants.
So now that we know that she wasn't there, and do we know for sure if Pence was there or not? Because I thought we don't know for sure, right? We believe that he was.
We now know it. So this is the basis for people, if they want to read the article, it's at amgreatness.com. This is the basis for two of the most used misdemeanors, and that is that these people trespassed and engaged in disorderly conduct because Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, who
right,
were under the protection of the Secret Service, were both in the building when the breach occurred.
Right.
We know now Kamala Harris not only was not in the building, she was at the DNC headquarters where an alleged pipe bomb was. Remember that story?
Right.
Memory hold. Now there's no proof that Mike Pence was in the building. They are trying to prevent defense counsels from asking Secret Service agents where he was, and they're also trying to conceal photographic evidence taken by White House reporters that would show his location. January 6th is a tissue of lie after lie, which I cover in my book, January 6th, How Democrats Use the Capitol Protest to Launch a War of Terror on the Political Right. And so I go into a lot of these details as to how not just January 6th has been weaponized, but the great likelihood that Democrats, government agencies, including the FBI, were mostly responsible for organizing that day and provoking a lot of the violence that we saw.
Incredible. So now they have said the people have been charged and sentenced with the charges that the vice president-elect and the vice president were on the property. What happens when we find out that that's not true? Do those charges, charges needs to just go away, right?
I suppose, this is my question. And a prosecutor actually had to correct the chief judge of the D.C. District Court, a hyper-partisan, Beryl Howell, a Obama appointee, when she was berating someone who pleaded guilty to parading in the Capitol and said how Kamala Harris had to flee the building. And the prosecutor said, well, actually, ma'am, that's not the case. We recently found out Kamala Harris hadn't been in the building, even though Kamala Harris herself was saying since January that she wasn't in the building.
Right.
So this is repeated hundreds of, if not thousands of times, because it had to be presented to also a secret grand jury who handed down these indictments. How they get away with it, I have no idea. But, to continue to call election fraud a big lie and then see how this DOJ continues to lie time after time about the events, inflating what happened on January 6th, covering up 14,000 hours of surveillance video that would show us exactly what happened inside and outside the building the entire day. This is the big lie, that this was an armed insurrection incited by Donald Trump. None of it is true.
So what happens now? Are we going to get to see the footage, all of it? Now, I realize that some is not pretty, but we continue to be fed lies. Just let us see what actually happened, and let's investigate who instigated and who didn't, and get on with it. Will we ever know that, or do you just feel like we're never going to know?
I do feel, honestly, and this is what I tell.
That's what we have you for, Julie. Just a second. I realize that's what you're doing, and I appreciate it, and I love you for that. But will it matter?
Well, this is a great point, and this is what people ask. Who cares? You still have millions of people who are going to believe what they were told originally. I said, well, you still have millions of idiot Democrats who really think that Trump was in cahoots with Putin and rigged and stole the election in 2016. You could give them all the evidence you possibly have, including the Mueller report itself, and they are not going to be convinced. So forget those people. They're sheep. They're lemmings. They want to wear 3 masks forever. They want us to get boosted. Those people you cannot rationalize with. But the rest of the American people, and quite frankly, the people whose lives have been destroyed over this, need to tell the truth. And this is the point of covering the trials now. We are already uncovering more lies. They are already having to take protective orders off of clips that they've been trying to conceal, not just from the public, but defendants and defense attorneys for over a year. So these trials are going to shine a light, and including on the FBI's involvement, they are going to shine a light on the truth. And it may be a few years, it may be 10 years till we get a full accounting of what happened that day and the government's involvement.
I hope it's not that long.
It's been unraveling pretty quickly already.
Yeah. I don't feel like it's going to be that long, because they can only hold these people, and at least that's what I believe, and it's being proven wrong. They can only hold them for so long before somebody says, hey, wait a minute.
I wish that was true, but I'm thinking in my head of defendants who've been incarcerated since last January and February, and their trials now delayed 5, 6, 7 months. These are men who will be incarcerated, in some cases, 18 to 20 months before they even have a trial. They haven't been convicted of a single crime. Now, of course, what is the government doing? Punishing them in the process, but also torturing them in plea deals so they don't have to release the evidence against them in court. And this is what I have seen, shockingly seen, in our quote-unquote legal and judicial system out of Washington, D.C. It is terrifying. And I'll tell you what, people on the left who think that these powers won't be turned on them eventually, go read a history book. That just simply is not the case. So anyone cheering that the QAnon shaman got 41 months in prison for pleading guilty after spending 317 days in solitary confinement on an obstruction charge, people who cheer that, not only do I find you completely inhumane and soulless, but if you think these powers won't be turned against you eventually by this regime, if they're not stopped, that just the history simply does not support that.
Julie Kelly, I wanted a little bit more uplifting, but whatever. I'll live with what you got.
Yeah, well, we will be sure.
Debbie Downer of democracy. Because everyone
well, we're going to tweet out this segment, your articles that have covered this topic of January 6th extensively, and a link to your book a little bit later on. So be looking for that.
Absolutely, and I appreciate it. And please keep in touch so that when we get new news from these trials, we definitely need to know. It's turning into an embarrassing sort.
Terrifying. It's terrifying.
It's agonizing. Julie Kelly, thank you. Author of January 6th, The Day Democracy Almost Died. How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. And, of course, the senior writer at American Greatness. Thank you so much. And, of course, a Blaze Television subscriber. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for having me on. Have a great week.
Absolutely.